The toilet paper stuff. I'm gonna try seeing if streaming this as well to Twitter.
That's
just
the new
as
thing.
But yeah, I've made sure that it's just stream only. If you want to participate, join the teams.
I should blur the background so you can't see all the toilet roll behind me and the pasta.
Open a cabinet over there.
Oh man, like listen, from here down it's just toilet roll.
Keep in mind Vivek has started the recording, right?
Yeah. Don't worry, man. It's all good. My wife, she's always ordering from Amazon, and we had like we have like 7 or 8 packs arrive every month or so, like on a reorder. So I've got like a bunch of it in my loft, and I'm I really lament that happens, but now I'm kind of really glad. I'm going to be the last one wiping my bum at the end of the world.
So, Vivek, did you say you were going to start the Twitter live?
I have started it.
It'll
start at 6.
See.
I think it'll start at 6 exactly.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, okay. Yeah. Let's see.
I was just gonna see if there's a lag or how it is.
There will be a lag. So that's why I mentioned there that it's stream only, join teams to participate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we have most of them. It's 6 o'clock, and I guess we'll give it a minute, maybe a minute or two before we start. Okay. Sancho's on, right? Sancho, you there?
I'm here.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Just making sure.
There.
Yeah. Whenever I see your last name, Sancho, I always think it's Sancho Harker. It's like first time I saw your last name, I thought that it's just your nickname. Then I just read it more carefully, and it's no more Harker. I'll take that as a nickname.
Yeah, works out well, right?
It suits as well to the topic that he's going to talk about. Really does. So it's a big hack.
Yeah. I mean, it is, but it isn't.
Just one letter. Take the R out and put the C in, and that's it.
Yeah. It's just my mind tricking me.
Okay, I guess we can get started. So, Geeta, if you wanna go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure I can. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for our March PowerAddicts Global Live Hangout. And today we have 2 really talented and knowledgeable guests. Our very first guest is Sancho Harker / Hacker. We just gave him a new name. And he is super talented. He's got a very smart way of working with branding templates within Power Apps, and that's what he's going to show us. And then our second guest for today is Ashvini Sharma. He is a program manager on the Power Automate team with Microsoft, and he is also part of the robotic process automation team. So he is going to talk to us about how we can take RPA to the next level, and we are super excited to see what the both of them have got to show us today. Sancho, it's all yours. Can't wait to see what you've got in store for us.
Okay, great. Let me just pop on over and share here. So, quick intro to me. I develop all sorts of solutions at
company called Pinnacle Group, do all sorts of things. Super user on the community forums, and I'm one of the PowerAddicts champs. Now, onto the good stuff. So, when we build apps in the community, there's two things I think that are a bit of a problem at the moment, and the one is accessibility, and the other one is how much time we're spending on branding and just changing properties of controls. So, for example, right now, if you're not building your app to be accessible for low vision or color blindness, it won't be, because unless you're making sure that your contrast ratios and everything else are correct, it just won't be accessible to a person who's got low vision or color blindness. And then on the other side of that, the time spent as a community, I mean, mid last year, maybe early last year, they said there's about 2.5 million Power Apps developers. It's probably a lot more now. You work out if each of us spent an hour of our career just changing the color properties of every control, which we all do when we're preparing an app to go out to clients or to use internally, that actually equals just that 1 hour. If you only spent 1 hour your whole career, that's 285 years we've collectively spent in time. And since I spend probably about an hour a week doing this, if you total that up for the community, that's 13,680 years of collective time we are spending in work hours every year. So there had to be a better way to do this. So let me jump on over and open up. So I built a template, and how I did that I'll get to in a minute. I just want to give a quick demo of it to start. So the idea is when you make a new screen and you insert some items, let's get a drop down and a date picker. Now the date picker is especially important because what can't you do with a date picker right now? You can't get rid of this blue. There is no setting for it currently in the editor. You'd have to do all sorts of, you'd have to basically create your own date picker to do it. Now, wouldn't it be so much easier if I've just inserted those controls. If I go to this theme palette screen and just pop down to one of my accessibility themes, go back to that screen, and we're done. That is how quick it should be. So instead of normally where you'd go in and you'd change every single color and fill property and border, by default, if I now insert another object like let's put a pen input. This pen input, for example, I've made it default depending on whether you're in a dark theme or a light theme to a dark or a light pen. And the same actually applies if I try and insert one of these brand new screens. The screens also come out defaulted to branding. So you could pop in your own colors there. The way I've built them is using a primary, secondary, and tertiary color, and then a primary, secondary, and tertiary text color to match those colors. And then everything else on the app just builds itself around that. So if I look at the app on start, now I've commented the out of this, but there is instructions for almost every part of this included in every part of the app. So these are the settings that start up when the app starts up. This is how it sets your first theme when you start the app. So if you want the app, for example, to default to another theme on startup, you just change these colors here. And if you wanted to add a new theme, it's as simple as taking a copy of this and pasting it below these existing themes here. The themes are just a collection of colors that then all they do is when you hit select theme, it's just setting these primary and secondary and tertiary variables. That's all it's doing. We're just using those three variables in different ways. So the other cool thing I did was your charts. Now, it's a bit of a fiddle to do the chart. You weren't able to do this mid last year, but then they did increase, or they did come up with a way for you to do the charts. But it's still a bit complicated because it's an array of colors. So wouldn't it be so much easier if I wanted to change the color of charts to start off with purple? Done. So if I now insert another chart, there we go. It's done by default. And that's how easy it should be. It should just be a case of this functionality is there in the editor, but they're not there yet. So then what I've done is I've taken a few examples, made a few examples by expanding on that theory of the primary, secondary, and tertiary. So if I go back to, let's go back to the default Microsoft Blue and go here. So I've got a menu, I've got some galleries with, you know, the pop and the selected item, and then when you select it, it hides and shows a detail screen instead of navigating to a detail screen. So that's another thing. And then the triggers for each item, so that editing that, you can see here is put up and notify. Those triggers are then controlled by a set of hidden developer logic, and that is a button. So what this does is it selects that button, and then the button, if I turn on my hidden developer things, buttons are just overlaid here, and then so it selects that button, and that button then does navigations or does editing, whatever you want. But the idea is that you then localize all your code into one singular location instead of having to navigate around and figure out where did I put that one piece of code that does the one thing inside this gallery, but maybe it was, so none of that. You all just localize it into a screen full of buttons that the description of the button actually tells you exactly what it does, and it makes it a lot easier to manage. So now I guess the question is, how did I do this? And that's where it gets interesting. So what I did, let's go here. What I did was I looked at the theme editor. Now, I'm sure you've all seen the theme editor that the Power Apps team put out. Looks like this, right? And now I noticed that they've got primary color 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you generate the file, and the file generates you this nice little MS app blank with a different theme. So I figured, okay, they're doing something to the MS app which makes it change the theme. Now, I also noticed when right-clicking on the MS app, if you have a zip tool like 7-zip or WinZip, it's actually an archive. So we can actually open this and view inside there. And then if we jump into the file we're looking for, themes.json, that supposed to be through there. And just open that. Downloads. Themes. Right, so it's a mess. When you open it up, you can't tell what's going on. One of the things I recommend is if you're using VS Code, there's a extension called Beautify. So if I just hit Beautify file, done. So now we can see the format of this file and how it's applying all these settings. So you've got your theme, and then its name and the palette, which is the list of properties and colors. So for example, they've got primary color 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is where it got interesting because I noticed there's no 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And they've got a bunch of other properties here. And when you open up the app and you import it into the editor, you get a different theme by default. So if we go a bit further down, we get to this thing called styles. Now, in here, we can see we've got default add media style. So if I now look for button, let's go back a few. Default button style. So this is what defines what a button looks like when you insert it into an app. And you've got all sorts of things here. You've got the border color, radius, disabled colors. So it's not just the fact that you could potentially template colors. You could template everything. You could template the X and Y coordinates. You could template the width and the height, the font, the size, whether it's italic, underline, all the properties that exist in when you add a new button. You can change those to something else. So what I did was I tried to figure out how to do that. So the easy way is we look for this property. We can see palette.button default width, and we go find button default width at the top. And we can see there, default width is 575 and the type is N for number. So that gave me another idea because I was like, okay, well, it's got N for number. We've got border style here, which uses E, and I figured that's something like environment variable. And then you've got C for color. So my initial concept was I'm going to use T for text and then have the text drive some kind of conditional once I'm inside the app. But what actually happened was when I used T and set it to whatever name, when I imported it, it treated that text as a variable. So by default, I was then able to have variables inserted in apps. So that's why if I go to here, and let's turn off admin settings. If I go into this this blank screen and look at that button, the default text color for that is set to primary color to text value. And I did that by just changing the themes.json. So if I open this, this is a copy of the template as it's stored on the community gallery. If I go to references and then take this themes and let's replace that. And I don't know why Visual Studio Code is not defaulting, but I will just pop that in there. So what I've done, if I look for primary, so all I've done is go through and find all the different colors, such as reserved gray color or default primary color, whatever they may be, and just set them to this text value. Now, once you've imported the theme editor type app and then save it down, it saves it down as X, but you can't import as X, and I'll show you why. The two have different structures. So this one on the left, that's from your theme editor. It generates a completely, no, that's not, other way around. This one on the left is from the theme editor. It has a flat structure. It only contains the themes and some basic info. Whereas an actual app, if you saved it from the portal, has the assets, which are usually your images and GIFs and those kind of things, your controls, which are JSONs that describe each control inside the app. So you could also potentially use this to programmatically add or remove items to screens or add screens to an app. So in terms of a DevOps process, this could be a big benefit. And then you've got things like references, which include you could have a default data source, for example. Let me see if I can't get that one. So if you open up the data sources.json file, you can actually see you can change, and I did this as an experiment once, you can change the custom default gallery or the custom default drop-down samples to be your own values. You don't actually have to use their default samples. So you could make your own sample sections. I didn't have much success in trying to create a brand new sample, but I was able to edit the existing ones to give them different values. So yeah, that's another way you can customize it. So there's a lot of stuff you can do inside the actual .msapp file before you even import it into your editor. And then doing that, what I did was I set all of the values to variables one by one in a kind of, if anyone knows CSS, I kind of did the equivalent of border 1px red. So I set every property one by one to blatantly red, and then inserted every single screen that exists to see where it's used within the different screens and where it's used within the different items. Because it turns out you can't actually change the default label a lot, because the way the product team has done it, they've used the default label for a lot of stretched things like this. So if you try set the default width of the label, for example, this whole screen breaks when you try insert it again, because it's trying to set it to something, but you've given it a default value of like 50 px wide. So I had to be very careful with that. But if you're not, especially if you're not going to use the new screens and you just want to do it yourself, then feel free to just have at it. You can change whatever you want then. The only real complication comes in with the insert screens. So you could, for example, I did this one here. So if you don't want the theme editor, the theme palette, you don't actually have to have that. This is a completely optional screen. I just thought it was nice because it gives them a choice of different values they can use to go through on the app. But what you could do is, for example, you could put a little button here that you hit it and it turns on accessibility mode, and you turn it off and it goes back to normal. And that was, to do that, all I'm doing is using that set theme that's in the beginning of the on start of the app. And if we're in accessible mode, set it to the dark mode, like accessibility theme. If not, then set to the default blue. That's all it's doing. And then all the controls, because they default to being set to variables and everything is set before you get into it, as soon as you change the colors, the whole app just rebrands. How am I doing on time? I don't want to encroach on anyone's time here.
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes, and then we have a question from Yusuf to Sancho, if you want to take that question.
Yeah.
Yusuf, if you want to ask the question, feel free to unmute and ask the question, or if not, I can relay that. Well, maybe I'll just read out his question. So he asks that you had to edit the actual.
Sorry, I was talking.
Oh, go ahead.
I was muted.
Go ahead.
Hey, Yusuf.
I always mean to ask you this, and I always forget.
Yeah.
But since you're editing the actual file, does anything happen whenever there is a new like Power Apps release or update? Like, does that have any impact on that file?
Well, the only thing that's happened is when new controls are added, they're not defaulted to branding. Because I hate to say this, but the team itself kind of painted themselves into a corner, because they've used that default label, for example, in like every screen that is on the insert screen. So if they change anything, it'll break everyone's insert screens that they've created historically.
Yeah, because I was curious about that, especially if, like, let's say they decide to one day actually give you flexibility on their themes that are already in there,
Yeah. So there are updates coming to the themes, but what you'll find if you dig through, and I don't recommend. Another thing I wanted to just mention is don't reinvent the wheel. Like, take apart my template, use the stuff I've fiddled with already, because there's 5,700 lines of JSON in here. It takes a long time to go through. Like, I've done all the legwork, just configure that how you want. But if you look at things like they have some really, let me find one. Is it no wait? They have some really obscure label ones. So there's default label. So there's overlays, rectangles. So they've built a lot of the controls around the default like label or button. So or HTML viewer. So unless they radically change what a default label is, which in most cases would break everyone's apps, and I don't think they're going to do that. Fingers crossed.
Right.
Unless they did something as drastic as completely change a whole base item, all they would do is add properties. So for example, if they add a new property to an existing control, it'll just pop in as one of these additional rows here on the actual themes. When it's running in the cloud, like it just adds or removes these items. It'll only be if you had to import a new one, you'd want to make sure it has all of these additional properties. And the easiest way to do that is create a blank app, save it locally, and then just extract out the themes.json from there. I'm just trying to find, I got some really obscure names here.
How much time did you spend, Sancho, on this? You talked about cigars for us, but
let's not talk about that. yeah, here we go. Here's what I'm looking for. So you can see there, control template name label. So they can't change what a standard label is because this entire control exists on the fact that the default label stays the same. And this control is called basic no size inverted background label style, which is a whole mouthful. But what it really means is on one of the insert screens, there's a label without a background that's inverted color. So if they change the default label, it's going to affect those insert screens, which will affect everyone's app that they've ever built that uses those screens or uses a default label. So generally what they do is they just add an additional property or they add a new control. Like for example, the template I've built doesn't have the stream control by default because when I released it, it wasn't there yet. So no, it doesn't really get affected. I mean, I've been doing this quite a long time now, and none of them have ever broken yet, and they've done quite a lot of changes. So
cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
I think in the longer term, obviously, I'd like to see this kind of thing in the product, and I've had some sort of brief discussions with the team about it, and they like the ideas, but obviously it's a lot of work for them as well. So.
Not half as much work it is for me going and changing it all.
Yeah. There were some other bits I did here. So this is a flexible height gallery. So instead of so the idea I wanted was I don't want this to just be for like pro makers or experienced makers like us or UX gurus like Yusuf. I want it for people who just don't have a clue and they're starting off. And I wanted to give them some examples of things you can do quite easily just by shifting around a gallery. Like this is a normal gallery, but to them, this is gold because all they're used to is the standard gallery they see when they go insert gallery, and they don't generally mess around with it a lot. So I'm giving them a lot of options here. And then the same was this one, flexible height gallery, where every item you click into, it then expands out and shows a bit more detail. Instead of navigating away, it gives like instantaneous views rather than having to dig in. And then there's so much because there's a menu here as well that I've built and that runs off collections in the onStart. And if you want to add, it automatically scales itself. And if you want to add, you just add or remove items to there. And then you can set like either static colors. For example, I wanted the save icon to always be green, or you could do whatever really. And then I've got triggers on each of those as well that then fire off based on a button being selected. So, I mean, yeah, because it uses primary, secondary, and tertiary colors, you could, for example, build whatever you want. I mean, like I built these galleries just using tertiary color as the background, secondary color as the mid, and then primary color as the selected. So you could build anything in sort of a 3-tone fashion, or just take apart the whole template and rebuild. So what I'm doing at the moment, rebuild it as a 2-tone, because I think that's quicker for me. I want just 2 colors, but I thought 3 would be a good start.
So I think you do have this. So Sancho has this on the community forum as well. So he has uploaded the theming template, so you can download it from there. And
Yep.
he already pasted the link. So yep, you can download it from there and use it. And you kind of take all the hard work that Sancho has put into it.
Don't reinvent the wheel.
Well, that is a lot of work. That's brilliant work, a lot of work. I can imagine the amount of time you'd have put into first understanding how the template works behind the scenes, and then replicating that for every control, and then replicating that for every theme, and then all the trial and errors that happen, right? It's a very good learning
yeah, especially
curve
with the new
too.
screen.
Yeah.
And some of the plans I want to do for the next version is I want to use his, I can't remember his long name now, but short for Tim on Twitter. He posted a item to the community forums, which is a WCAG checker within PowerApps. So what I want to do is make the next version of the PowerApp template tell you when you're doing something that doesn't actually meet WCAG. So I've got a basic one.
Yeah.
I've got a basic one here where you can like test out themes just by changing the properties of these boxes instead of digging through all the code. So, you know, if you want to make a green whatever theme and then set that, you can then see how that would look for you, for example. But now what I want to do is on that same screen, have it tell you if what you're doing doesn't match WCAG, because obviously if it's not contrasted enough, you're going to exclude out people who have color blindness.
Oh,
That's
wow.
amazing. Yeah, a lot of
That's
times, I mean, you
amazing,
don't, yeah, you don't realize what color, the proportionate ratios of those colors actually match. Yep. So is that part of branding template number 3?
It is, yes.
What else should we expect in number 3?
Well, components, because components should be GA by that point.
Yeah.
I tried to do a demo for tonight. Actually, I was going to do components, but it's still a bit fiddly with the global variables. Doesn't take nicely to them when the app loads. So the idea being you could make templates that then are branded, and with components that are branded that you can then pull into other apps just using a base template. So like having a component library, but then having them also able to switch themes on the fly instead of having to do that programmatically yourself every single time.
That's going to be awesome. Yeah. Sandy was mentioning in the chat before that everybody probably is going, ooh, ah, when you were showing that, because I mean, even when I downloaded it, I was like, what is this? So yeah, it's great stuff that you're working on. So yeah, thank you for sharing this.
I have one unrelated question, semi-related question, Sancho. Bit of an interesting one. So all that sample data, I wonder what happens to it when the app's published. Do you think it stays in there and bloats the file out, or do you think you gut it and?
Yeah, it definitely stays there. I've actually pulled it out of some files. If you don't use it, it's a few extra KB at most, like I think it's like 13 KB or something stupid.
Yeah, but really, if you're standing in the middle of a field and you've got no Wi-Fi, every
and you're on
kilobyte
edge,
counts.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, you could pull that out of the published file. So you save it down, edit the JSON, pull out all that extra gumph, and then drag it back into the zip.
Nice.
Cool. I guess let's move. We ready for the second topic for today?
This is why we needed power virtual, which is why we needed UI flows to top that. Because I mean, like, only something as amazing as
I should have gone first. Sancho should have gone second. This is hard to beat.
Oh.
My gosh.
Let me ask you, Ashvini, how much do you want to hire this man?
Yes, I was taking notes on, hey, the WCAG 2.1, right? That's a great one. That I don't know if we have any plans of providing out-of-the-box evaluators. That would be quite useful.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn.
Yes. Yes.
Sancho isn't wasting any minute. It's like, well, Sancho, we have a couple of questions for you in the chat, so I think it would be lovely if you can answer them.
Do you want to do them now? I can do them.
Yeah, you can just go on continuing to answer them in the chat while we have Ashvini get started on the. Well, thank you, Ashvini, for taking your time today to share with the wider community what this whole wide new world about RPA is.
Yes, absolutely. It's
like the most buzzing and trending term, and everybody's super excited about UI flows, and we've all got a good taste of it. And we can't wait to see what you can show for us today.
Yeah, I think the Gartner, I think, was the one that said RPA is the number 3 term on their website, which is just insane. It's just like how cloud used to be or big data used to be a few years back. So it's just insane how popular the term is. And on the scenarios itself, I thought I'd go through some real use case scenarios that we've been hearing back from customers. This is separate than the calculator hello world that I think we've shown before. These are very simple, straightforward scenarios where people are just spending time doing this themselves manually, that we're working with them to see if robots can do it instead, the software can do it. And I'll list through 4 of them. They're very straightforward ones. There is a soft drink manufacturer we're working with, and they use SAP UI. They put in some transaction information to SAP UI, and that transaction has some order details for those transactions. And they click through the UI. They want to export the PDFs and send it in an email. Yeah, very, very straightforward, simple scenario. There's another one, which is a custom app that somebody built, which gives them visibility into these assets they have around the world. And there are many assets they have around the world, where there's a tree view in their custom app that they click, and it takes them 30 seconds for that click to happen and for the UI to update. They just have to do this repeatedly to see if anything has changed across their assets around the world. And that's another one that just wastes a lot of time for somebody. And the app crashes and it just restarts, and it's just not a pleasant day for anybody concerned. So that's the second one, where people want to just have a bot do that work and the bot waiting instead of some human waiting. Third one, this was 2 weeks back. I was on a call with somebody in Europe that has some system waiting for an email to show up. And they just watch Outlook. They start Outlook and they watch Outlook for this email to show up. I kid you not. These are quite sophisticated people, but just there are some tools that they could be using that would help them out. And in fact, they are using an RPA tool, a robotic process automation tool, that does exactly that, which is it launches Outlook and it waits for an email to show up. Yeah, which I think with Flow, for people that are aware of Power Automate, you don't have anything waiting for anything, right? It's just a trigger. When a new email shows up with this filter, just go do something. So I think even just basic, whatever we have with Power Automate today is useful completely on day one, even without UI automation. And finally, there's one more that has a whole bunch of reports that they generate. And these reports are generated from command prompts that they execute on the machine. And they just have 4 command files that they execute over and over to generate these reports, and take the output as a file and email it over to somebody else. It's just basic, very straightforward use cases where people are just wasting time doing all this automation by hand. So that's a smattering of the experiences of the use cases that we're looking at, and we're working with these people hands on hand, just one by one, to just make sure we have people that are able to build something useful. And along the way, we're finding gaps in the product and we're fixing them as fast as we could. One of the gaps that we found was unattended automation, because people wanted to just execute it lights out. It just works in the back. And that's what we released earlier. I don't know if it's this week or last week or over the weekend, I forget. Things are getting a little chaotic now. So yeah, that's generally what the scenarios are that we're running into. And I can walk through it. The one that resonates the most with customers is still the invoicing one that I did a YouTube on a Microsoft Mechanics video. I don't know if folks have seen it already. I can go through that one. That's still one that is pretty useful because it shows the new way of doing automation for it uses API and AI and UI together. So if folks haven't seen it already, I'm happy to walk through that one.
Yep, I haven't seen it. I should probably grab a link for it too. I didn't realize there was one out there.
Yeah, let me show
I
this.
guess you can share, I guess. I mean,
Yeah, you can start sharing your screen too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so the motivation for this was we wanted to, this was a synthetic example that we made, but when we were going through it, it just turns out it was quite it resonated a lot with people because they had a lot of the scenarios they wanted to go help automate. This is, let me know when you can see it. This is the demo.
Yeah, we see your screen.
Okay, great. So the demo essentially is take an email with an invoice, and remember the reason I mentioned these use cases up front is because people are actually doing these by hand today. All of these steps they're doing by hand. So this scenario is essentially when a new email shows up with an invoice, I want to extract that invoice and send it over to AI Builder to extract contents from the invoice. And that's another, AI Builder is another one that I'm speaking with a very large retailer tomorrow, just to see how we can apply this forms recognizer into their business processes. And then there's a request sent to approvals in Teams to say, hey, there's a new invoice that showed up. Do you want to approve this or reject? And then once approved, there's a legacy application that has no UI, that has no API. And the task is to automate that legacy app. So instead of filling in data manually, the bot can go in and launch the app, enter the data, and then close the app down. So the way I did it is the scenario itself is one where there's a new email that shows up in the inbox. This is a shared inbox. And as soon as that email shows up, the next thing that happens is a Teams message is sent, which contains data that's extracted from the invoice. And after the person makes the approval to say, yep, approve, go ahead, then the bot launches and it goes through the application and filling in the data that has been extracted from the invoice automatically into the application. That's what the scenario is. And I'm just going to zoom through how to create such a scenario. And all this is live. You can create it right away. So there's no magic here. This is all doable. The email is sent back. So the way to build it, this is the one which is already it's useful for customers, which is when a new email arrives, post a message to the channel, which itself is quite useful right away. But in this process, what I do is create a forms processing model with Contoso invoices. And here I upload 5 instances of the Contoso invoice. And this is just to train the model to have a model be something, have something that it can extract the data across those invoices. The system goes through and analyzes those documents, and it comes back with the fields it has detected. So if I take a look at these, it has detected both the key value pairs like invoice number, but also tables themselves, with the line item details for each invoice. I can then select whichever fields I want to extract from this invoice, essentially providing the structure of what I want to pull through. And once I'm done, then in the wizard, I can just say, train this model next. And I'm doing all these without Python or without data science knowledge. I'm just using it as a citizen developer. I can publish this and then use it inside my inside Power Automate itself. And inside Power Automate, what you'll see is I can go in and edit the. So what I've got so far is just a very simple AI model that extracts data from the invoice. And what I can do next is go through and edit the model, edit the flow, and add an action that invokes the predict action for the AI builder. I can select the different models that exist. In this case, some are available out of the box. I'll select Contoso invoices because that's the one I just created, and say this is going to be a PDF file instead of an image, and then specify what's the attachment that comes in. So I'm now just passing in the attachment that was coming from the email into the AI builder, and then routing that as in a predict action to AI builder, and then extracting that data and sending over to the Teams message by posting a message. So this is awesome, because here what I'm doing is applying AI instead of AI being this abstract concept which I don't know how to apply for my business. I've taken a very specific example of invoice processing, and I'm using that to extract data directly as part of my my flow. The AI builder also produces back results on the confidence. So you could say if my confidence is less than 90%, then if it's more than 90%, I want to have it process automatically. If it's less than 90%, I don't want it to process automatically. So all that data, metadata, is also exposed from AI builder. The next step here is to go through, and this is the application that I've got. And this is just a custom legacy application that has, as I mentioned, no APIs to automate it. And the way I automate this is by going through and creating a new UI flow. And this is what we released in public preview with the support for both desktop and web application automations. So in this case, I created a desktop application for invoice information, and I specify some inputs. So these inputs essentially will be dynamic variables that I'll pass in as I'm defining the script myself. So one of them is invoice number, and I give it some sample value. And the only change that I'll be doing as part of using the application is using these dynamic fields that I'm defining instead of typing in 1, 2, 3, 4 manually into my keyboard. And that's how the system would know. Hang on just a minute. So I've got these 4 inputs defined, and I go through to record, essentially launch a recorder. And that experience essentially gives me a desktop recorder that I can use for recording my interactions with the application. So I go through, I click record, and now it's monitoring. The system is monitoring all the application interactions I'm doing. So as I use the input for contact and paste it in there and click search, the system is just creating a log of everything that I'm doing within this application. And the only change again is that I'm still clicking through the application as I normally would, but wherever I enter data, I'm using variables that I've defined up ahead instead of typing them in manually. So now I want to enter the invoice information. So I go in and use an input, which is invoice number, and similarly for invoice date, I'll go ahead and use that input. And for the invoice amount, I'll go clear the field and then use invoice amount as the field for entering in. And at this point, all I need to do is save the invoice information that I've got and close the application. That's it. So I've now essentially gone through the recording experience of defining a script. And these are all the actions that the script does. It launches the app, it does a left click. And if you click on that action, you can see that there's a screenshot that we took of what control was actually left click. This next action is one where we provide the contact information, and that's a field that's passed in just like dynamic content in the rest of flow. And I can review the rest of it to see if these clicks were exactly what I wanted them to do. Now what I've got is just like with AI Builder, I had AI wrapped up inside a model. With UI flows, I've got UI interaction now wrapped up inside a script that I can invoke as part of my overall flow. So I can say, if the approval was approved, that I want to go ahead and click UI flows, and I want to automate UI flow interaction. So I can specify the connection information to, now in this case, there is a gateway that's running on my machine. Of course, the Power Automate service runs as a service. The application runs on my machine. And there has to be a bridge from the service to be able to contact my desktop. And the Power BI, the data gateway, is the same technology that we use in this case also for bridging from the service down to my machine that is running the application. There is a desktop component that I also installed. That is the agent, the UI flow agent. And essentially, when the flow executes, it gets to the step, sends a request down through the gateway to my desktop agent. And at that point, it's going to launch the application. I think my next step here is to go through, and I have to find excuse me, just to make sure the demo wouldn't fall over. I recorded this one, so hang on. As soon as you select the UI flow, what's supposed to happen is that all those variables that are specific to this UI flow, in this case, there were 4 variables I had defined, are now available for me to pass values in. And at this point, I'll bind this to the output from AI Builder. So the invoice information that was getting extracted by AI Builder, I just search for invoice value and pass that in as dynamic content. So when a new email shows up with different invoice information, I'll use that as a dynamic input to launch this. And that's it. That's what I've got in my flow that sends a message to teams. If the option that the stakeholder selected was to approve, then it sends an email for approval and then routes it to, then launches UI flow to go ahead and enter that data into the application. This can run now, starting this week. It can run in an unattended fashion, so you don't have to be logged on, and the system will log you in using the credentials you specified to it. It'll create a session, launch the application, execute the automation, and then log out at the end of the session completion. So you don't have to physically be there. If you were watching what the system was doing, then you would see an experience where after you approved, after you got a new email that had some content and you approved it, what you will see is the application actually launching. And in this case, the bot entering all this information is, of course, if it's running unattended, then you wouldn't see any of this because this is just a tree falling in the forest and nobody would know unless there's an error. If there's an error, then we would take snapshots. Essentially, we'll have a video leading up to the error that you can see in the execution log for UI flow to see what were the steps preceding this one that failed. And right now we can still tweak it, but right now what we do is the 5 actions leading up to the error to give you some context of what was failing, what was happening before, so you can diagnose if the app was in the wrong state. And that's it. That's the it clicks through, and then at the end it sends an email back to the person saying that's the invoice. Yeah, so that's essentially the end-to-end scenario for using APIs for watching out for emails, using AI for extracting data from your invoice, using approvals, or this human system interaction where the system is offloaded and it's doing all the mundane tasks and it waits for the human to make a call, and maybe the human makes a call every Friday afternoon because that's the best time for them to approve, batch up and approve these. And then the system has been waiting until then. And as soon as that's done, then it goes ahead and launches the rest of the automation, which is UI automation itself. Yeah, so that's, I'll pause, I'll stop sharing there. Comments, feedbacks, questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So with this, with the UI flow, can we still export and import those into other environments?
Export and import into other environments. What does that mean? Oh, other environments as in the Power Platform environments, or?
Yes.
What we're working on now is the ability to have these be part of solutions, which UI Flow right now cannot be part of solutions until probably next week. But we are just now working on that. So once that is, then whatever you get as part of the solutions will work for UI flows as well. So if that helps.
What happens if sorry, just had a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if one of the fields change? For example, you had one of those fields being filled out. So is it possible to go back into UI flow, and it's probably the the 5th step in 10 steps, and I just want to change just that one step because now I've moved the field, or I have a new field that I want to track. Is that as simple as just going in and just editing that one part, one action within the UI flow, or how does that work?
Yeah, you can. Yes. In fact, all of the flows have. Let me bring up flow while I'm answering. Essentially, all of those steps have what's called a selector that shows you how would UI flows find the element that you're looking for. And to be honest, it's not as easy as it should be. It has, hey, you're in the Excel app, and within the Excel app, you're in this control, which is a pane, and within the pane or the grid control, and you are in the cell, which is E2, or it shows the application structure in that. So if your button just moved around and the app structure didn't change, okay, no problem. You don't have to update your automation. But if your button physically changed its hierarchy of the way it was laid out, or it moved to a different tab, for example, then you would have to go through and update the selector. So yes, you could do that.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
I know the licensing was kind of mentioned. It just came out. So I don't know if you want to cover that quickly or just point people. I already put the link, but if you want to cover it.
Sure, yeah, I can cover it. I don't know if I'm stepping on landmines, but I can absolutely cover it. So
I would say just an overview. But
yeah, it is fine. It's friendly audience. We have, so from a SKU perspective, we have 2 SKUs that are available. One of them is for attended automation. And that one is if I'm sitting in front of the machine and I just want to accelerate some of my work, that I want a bot to assist what I'm doing. And that one we announced the pricing for. It's $40 per user per month. And that includes Flow, Power Automate capabilities as well. The other one is unattended, where if I have a bot that I want to run, like this invoice processing one that I want to have run on a machine. That's an add-on, and you can add that on to a Flow license that you have to say, okay, if you have 10 machines that are needed to execute all the orders that you're getting, then you end up buying 10 bots for one for each of the machines and applying that. Yeah, that's a simple one. If you compare it to when we talk to the analysts and we speak with the customers, it is actually much cheaper. For some, it's by an order of magnitude cheaper than what you're used to, especially since in many of the other platforms, you have to pay for the development experience or the orchestration experience or the platform fee. Or subscription just to have the privilege of having to use this service. So it's fairly low cost comparatively, but compared to Office, it's way higher cost. So it's just the value that you end up getting.
Yeah.
And let me show you, Geeta, for the question that you were asking. I just brought up so this is the Hello World. I just had a flow around, and this is a Hello World one that has a sea of those left clicks and post element or enter value. And for each one of these, we have some advanced properties. And the selector is one that right now we store a lot of information in the selector, including the bounding rectangle or the framework ID and the XY offset. And a lot of our philosophy right now is to store a lot of information during recording so that at playback time, we could use a variety of strategies to playback. And we have, this is the this is how by default the system will try to find the path. It'll look for an application frame window called calculator, and within that number pad, within that find the button called number 1. And if this button changed, for example, then you would this is the selector you would change. And we have a few heuristics we use for falling back in case that we cannot access that directly.
Got it. Yep. Thanks.
Mhm.
No, Thomas had he had a workaround that he usually does that he mentioned in the chat. He says that rebuilding a single step within a UI flow is, what he usually does is use scopes. So he'll have a recording scope and then, add the new action, move the action between. Yeah.
You're right. So what I meant is that once you do the recording, it's always put in a scope. So like every single recording sequence is just a scope. So like if I want to replace just one step, I'm just doing another recording and then copying the logic from this step, like the target. This how we call it? I even use
selector.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah, the selector.
Selector.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Just copying the selector because it's really hard to figure out what the selector should be if the field changed.
That's right.
Because you saw that this JSON is so large.
That is exactly right. Yeah, you can. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. You can go ahead and add actions manually. So for example, you could just say, I want to left click, but to Thomas's point, the left click action itself has the selector, and this is just, it's not discoverable. And that's one of the things that I'd love to improve in the future. If you had another step that had the selector that you could copy paste it in, which is what recording itself. So you could go ahead and say, I want to add an action to do some recording, and go ahead and record a series of steps, and then copy paste that selector. Yeah. In fact, I think 3 weeks back, every week we're changing. So I think 3 weeks back we started allowing you to record within a scope, Thomas. So this was done for error handling, where if my previous step succeeded or previous step failed, then do this step. If my previous step was failed or was skipped, then do this. So you can now record from within the scope itself, which you don't. Previously, you would only had to you could only record outside an app scope at the global level, but we are slowly bring that in also. There's some big announcement happening on the chat.
It's relatively small, but yeah, I guess a lot of people saying a lot of good stuff about this, and everybody's admiring your work, the walkthrough that you went through, and somebody's Keith's telling that your voice is amazing.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
It's like silk, and it's sending me to sleep. It's like
I'm doing
a beautiful nursery rhyme. It's awesome.
That's what I use for coffee. Yes.
All right. So yeah, if there are not any more questions on UI flows, I know we are at the top of the hour, but just a few more announcements, and we'll kind of then close the call. So let me share my screen here. Let's see. Team, come on.
Hey, Vivek, while you do that, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Hey, Ashwin, this is great. I've been using UI flows for a little bit here and there at a retail shop where they had non-API, meaning REST API, so we had to use that. Is there, once I record it, I want to shorten the playback time because I'm tired of watching, right? That it's taking, when I'm doing it, I have to do it slowly, and then I want to, is there a best practices on just to use the Selenium, the add-in, or is there any other way that you guys have any documentation on how to kind of shorten that playback time?
This is for the browser or for the desktop?
For the browser base.
Okay. Yeah, for browser, there should be a property on the action itself, which is when you use the UI flow action, when you add the UI flow action for executing browser, there should be a property there which says how long should you wait for.
Okay.
What did you put in that property?
2 don't recall what I put. So is it for each of the steps that how many seconds it's gonna wait?
Yes,
Okay,
that's right.
okay.
That's right.
Maybe that's
Yes.
what it is then.
Yeah, let me know. Drop me a note if
Okay,
that
we'll
doesn't
see.
work.
Okay,
I'd love to see if but that would be the way to do it.
okay. And then is there a different way for desktop or?
Yeah, on desktop
Okay.
for every action, there is a property which says how long to wait after the action. So if
Okay.
you click on like the left click we were just looking at, if you click on the advanced options, there'll be a property that says wait after action.
Okay.
And you could set that to 0. By default, it waits as long as you took to record it.
Right.
But you could set that. You could play around with that time frame.
Okay. And then last question: can I, if there's independent steps in there, can I run in parallel? Like say I have 5 or 6, they're not dependent on each other. I want to go fit faster. Is there a way to run it in parallel?
You can for UI. No, you cannot. Only one of them because they can step on each other for UI. So
Sounds
only
good. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So one thing that we wanted to share, I know everybody is kind of aware about the coronavirus situation, and thankfully this call is virtual, so everybody can attend this. I know a lot of conferences have got canceled, a lot of things going around. So one thing that we did want to share was the crisis communication app template, which was released by Microsoft as a kind of app template which you can deploy in your tenant, and it's basically for keeping everyone informed about the things, kind of making company announcements, and this app basically helps you to do that. So have a look at this. I know the product team spent they turned this around in 48 hours. So yeah, it is a crisis right now. So if it is something that you would like to use in your organization, just to keep everyone informed, and there are some other features of this app as well. So have a look at it and see. And even if you don't want to use it for this, there are some good features in the app itself, the use of components, responsiveness, a lot of good things in this app template. So have a look at it anyways.
Hey, Vivek,
yep.
we do a quick shout out to the agents for help.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we do. We should. So I think it started with, sorry, I forget the name.
Georgia.
Yeah. Georgia started this app at
Special Agent
Schlumberger.
001. Yep.
You're online, Georgia, right? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, so go ahead, introduce yourself, and just give us a brief about how you came up with this.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Georgia and working for Schlumberger. And we started early with this crisis, with the outbreak. Lots of meetings, and we decided that an app would be good for our communications part. So we developed it in January, late January, and since then we are using it in our company, and right now I think it has more than 20,000 users.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I would encourage everyone to use the template. It's very good. That's
awesome. Yeah, so they started at Schlumberger. Georgia started this app, and then Alan kind of took it from there. He worked with the product team, and the product team finally came up with this app template, which anybody could use. So yeah, it's definitely something that you should look out. All right, the next thing. So a lot of times we got a lot of complaints on they are not able to keep a track on where the details about the Hangouts are. The ICS file didn't work, and it wasn't that every time somebody had a look at the Twitter, So we are launching the PowerAddicts.com website. The whole intention of this website is to keep you one thing is to keep you informed of all the Hangout announcements. So all the Hangout announcements will be posted here. You can subscribe to the blog if you want to, so that you get the announcements in your email. All the recordings will be posted here as well. And we have the links for the merchandise as well. But yeah, this was one thing which a lot of people had been asking for, because it's not always easy to catch it on Twitter. So hopefully this helps you in staying up to date on the Hangout announcements. And yeah, I mean, have a look at it. It's wearePowerAddicts.com.
I'm hearing some applauses behind the background.
So yeah, and we are also automating a lot of things around it. So I did a video on this, how we are actually posting this, what kind of posts and Twitter and all the posts, everything is being automated. So that way, we also and we are using Power Automate for that. So there is a video that I made if you want to check that out. See how we are making short links, we are updating those, we are creating the ICS files all through Power Automate. So that's one way we are managing this event. All right, any other questions or anything before we end the call? Okay. All right, but so I guess before we end, everyone stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, I guess.
20-second rule.
Yeah, so
Sing
you
happy
probably have
birthday.
heard a lot of it already. So I'm not
sing
gonna
happy
repeat
birthday
everything.
in your head. Yeah, sing it in your head, not out loud, because people look at you really strange. Yeah, found out the hard way.
Yeah, stay safe, stay healthy. And thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you next month. And the date will be out soon. I guess it's April 14th, right? But yeah, that will be posted on wearePowerAddicts.com. So go
and you
there.
can subscribe to announcements too, so that way you can always know when we add a new event or announcement. So
yep, go there and check it out. Thank you everyone for attending. See you next month.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks.
So is he dropped off. I was gonna ask.